Hey, what's up, YouTube? This is Mike with the Clip Farm. I'm here with my buddy
Matt, also with the Clip Farm. Good to see y'all.
So today we're going to be doing the, I'm going to say it's not live. We're pre-recording this, but we're going to be doing the Tucker Carlson, Vladimir Putin interview, and we're just going to be talking about it. So this could potentially be the interview was 2 hours, so it's for sure going to be a 2-hour or a 2-part, but probably a 3 or 4-part on our end. So we're gonna go into watching it, and then we're gonna talk about what we think, feel, or however we feel about it. So if you're ready, Matt, we'll get right into this.
All right, Mike, let's do this.
All right. What up, Tucker? That's a great face right there.
Yeah,
the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, shot February 6, 2024 at about 7 p.m. in the building behind us, which is, of course, the Kremlin. The interview, as you will see if you watch it, is primarily about the war in progress, the war in Ukraine, how it started, what's happening, and most pressingly, how it might end. One note before you watch. At the beginning of the interview, we asked the most obvious question, which is, why did you do this? Did you feel a threat, an imminent physical threat? And that's your justification. And the answer we got shocked us. Putin went on for a very long time, probably half an hour, about the history of Russia going back to the 8th century. And honestly, we thought this was a filibustering technique and found it annoying and interrupted him several times. And he responded he was annoyed by the interruption. But we concluded in the end, for what it's worth, that it was not a filibustering technique. There was no time limit on the interview. We ended it after more than 2 hours. Instead, what you're about to see seemed to us sincere, whether you agree with it or not. Vladimir Putin believes that Russia has a historic claim to parts of Western Ukraine. So our opinion would be to view it in that light as a sincere expression of what he thinks. And with that, here it is. Mr. President, thank you. On February 22nd, 2022, you addressed your country in a nationwide address when the conflict in Ukraine started. And you said that you were acting because you had come to the conclusion that the United States, through NATO, might initiate a, quote, surprise attack on our country. And to American ears, that sounds paranoid. Tell us why you believe the United States might strike Russia out of the blue. How did you conclude that?
It's not that America, the United States, was going to launch a surprise strike on Russia. I didn't say that. Are we having a talk show or a serious conversation?
Here's the quote. Thank you. It's a formidable serious talk.
Because your basic education is in history, as far as I understand.
Yes.
So if you don't mind, I will take only 30 seconds or 1 minute to give you a short reference to history for giving you a little historical background.
Please.
Let's look where our relationship with Ukraine started from. Where did Ukraine come from? The Russian state started gathering itself as a centralized statehood, and it is considered to be the year of the establishment of the Russian state in 862. When the townspeople of Novgorod invited a Varangian prince, Rurik, from Scandinavia to reign. In 1862, Russia celebrated the 1000th anniversary of its statehood. And in Novgorod, there is a memorial dedicated to the 1000th anniversary of the country. In 882, Rurik's successor, Prince Oleg, who was actually playing the role of regent at Rurik's young son, because Rurik had died by that time, came to Kiev.
I'll pause that real quick right here. I do find this interesting in the sense that a lot of their history is important. And it's not something that I necessarily know all the ins and outs of. So,
me either. I was actually shocked to hear that Russia's over 1,000 years old. I knew it was far older than the United States, but I didn't realize they'd had that much history.
Yeah, I think if I remember, sounds pretty stupid, but when Russia hosted one of the Olympic Games, they did kind of like their history of that, and that's when I learned how long Russia's been around. You know, like that country's been around and their history in a lot of those outlying countries. So I find it interesting. You know, like we're going to be hearing Putin's side of things and Russia's perspective doesn't necessarily mean that that's how the rest of the world views it. But I find it interesting to hear at least their perspective of why these things are the way they are. So,
history lesson I'm actually learning.
how his stuff is being translated for us.
Yeah. Well, and also any history is going to be tainted by local nationality. So the Russians are going to view things different than the United States, the people in the United States would, or Australia or Britain or wherever.
Right. And yeah, obviously, Ukraine borders Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have a friend that's from Bosnia. So he's given me a lot of his insight on Russia because he dealt with that while he was a little kid when Russia was having issues with Bosnia, and the U.S. came in and got involved as well. So I kind of got his perspective on it as well. But yeah, I just find this interesting. I don't know that I'll talk a whole lot through the history lesson. I just wanted to preface that some of this, what he's saying, some of this is new information to me. So
a lot of it's going to be new to me, I'm sure.
So just let me know if you hit a spot where you want me to pause. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that real quick.
He ousted two brothers who apparently had once been members of Rurik's squad. So Russia began to develop with two centers of power, Kiev and Novgorod. The next very significant date in the history of Russia was 988. This was the baptism of Russia, when Prince Vladimir, the great-grandson of Rurik, baptized Russia and adopted Orthodoxy, or Eastern Christianity. From this time, the centralized Russian state began to strengthen. Why? Because of the single territory, integrated economic ties, one and the same language, and, after the baptism of Russia, the same faith and rule of the prince. The centralized Russian state began to take shape. Back in the Middle Ages, Prince Yaroslav the Wise introduced the order of succession to a throne. But after he passed away, it became complicated for various reasons. The throne was passed not directly from father to eldest son, but from the prince who had passed away to his brother, then to his sons in different lines. All this led to the fragmentation and the end of Rus as a single state. There was nothing special about it. The same was happening then in Europe. But the fragmented Russian state became an easy prey to the empire created earlier by Genghis Khan. His successors, namely Batu Khan, came to Rus, plundered and ruined nearly all the cities. The southern part, including Kiev, by the way, and some other cities, simply lost independence, while northern cities preserved some of their sovereignty. They had to pay tribute to the horde, but they managed to preserve some part of their sovereignty. And then a unified Russian state began to take shape with its center in Moscow. The southern part of Russian lands, including Kiev, began to gradually gravitate towards another magnet, the center that was emerging in Europe. This was the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. It was even called the Lithuanian-Russian Duchy, because Russians were a significant part of this population. They spoke the old Russian language and were Orthodox. But then there was a unification, the union of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland. A few years later, another union was signed, but this time already in the religious sphere. Some of the Orthodox priests became subordinate to the Pope. Thus, these lands became part of the Polish-Lithuanian state. During decades, the Poles were engaged in Polonization of this part of the population. They introduced their language there, tried to entrench the idea that this population was not exactly Russians, that because they lived on the fringe, they were Ukrainians. Originally, the word Ukrainian meant that a person was living on the outskirts of the state, along the fringes, or was engaged in a border patrol service. It didn't mean any particular ethnic group. So the Poles were trying to, in every possible way, to colonize this part of the Russian lands and actually treated it rather harshly, not to say cruelly. All that led to the fact that this part of the Russian lands began to struggle for their rights. They wrote letters to Warsaw demanding that their rights be observed and people be commissioned here, including to Kiev.
I beg your pardon, can you tell us what period? I'm losing track of where in history we are. The Polish oppression of Ukraine.
It was in the 13th century. Now I will tell you what happened later and give the dates so that there is no confusion. And in 1654, even a bit earlier, the people who were in control of the authority over that part of the Russian lands addressed Warsaw, I repeat, demanding that they send them to rulers of Russian origin and Orthodox faith. When Warsaw did not answer them, and in fact rejected their demands, they turned to Moscow, so that Moscow took them away. So that you don't think that I'm inventing things, I'll give you these documents.
Well, it doesn't sound like you're inventing it. I'm not sure why it's relevant to what happened 2 years ago.
But still, these are documents from the archives, copies. Here are the letters from Bogdan Khmelnytsky, the man who then controlled the power in this part of the Russian lands that is now called Ukraine. He wrote to Warsaw demanding that their rights be upheld. And after being refused, he began to write letters to Moscow, asking to take them under the strong hand of the Moscow Tsar. There are copies of these documents. I will leave them for your good memory. There is a
So, kind of what I gathered from this, and maybe you can correct me if I was wrong. It sounds like Ukraine and all the countries that we recognize, but he was talking about the 1300s.
Yeah.
And then the documents are from the 1600s, but basically they were the border states for Russia, and they basically more aligned their ideologies with like Europe and was it France? Is that what I heard? French?
Poland was one of them. I recall hearing.
So kind of, I mean, just the way I can visualize that myself, it'd be like if Texas was to do the same thing. Say Texas seceded and said, we're not going to be a part of this anymore. You know, essentially that country just said, we're not going to answer to Russia anymore. Or they weren't called Russia at the time. It was the USSR, if I'm not mistaken.
Something, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like what I'm just trying to grasp the concept of what he's saying. And he's bringing documents that prove it on the Russian side of things, not necessarily the Ukrainian side of things. He's just mapping the picture. But I wanted to make sure that,
I mean, some of this could be verified through other sources, I'm sure. But the way I was kind of taking it was, okay, here's the fuzzy border. You know, Poland's over here, just using them as an example because they were directly involved with Ukraine. And they're closer to Ukraine than the Soviet capital. So it's kind of a divided country thing. They're kind of basically not necessarily fighting over the land, but it's disputed. How far is, where is the border?
Yeah, I think when we get into part 2, I'm going to try to grab some of the information that Putin's talking about here and seeing if I can either dispute it or prove it with what he's saying. So like I'm not disagreeing or agreeing with him right now. I'm just I'm learning the Russian perspective, I would say, while he's giving us his history lesson.
One other small point. Well, I appreciate Putin's gesture there to Carlson with the documents. Yeah, sorry, the Soviet Union does not have the best track record when it comes to, they have been known to produce a few fakes here and there. So,
yeah, I mean, it feels like this is a genuine gesture of like, this is our stuff, but it could be, that they've been lied to since the 1600s. So he could very well be telling his truth, but it may not be the truth. So
it could be taught history, not necessarily accurate.
Yeah, exactly. Because the people who win wars are the ones that decide what the history says. So, no, I just find it interesting, just because I have never really heard the Russian perspective of how they view their history. So I kind of find this interesting, and it gives me a couple of things. Like I said, when we go to do part 2, probably tomorrow, I'll try to pull up some facts and things because for those that are watching this, I appreciate you watching, but we made it about a week, so it's been about a week since this interview came out, and we didn't really catch much of this interview at all. We both wanted to review it, but we were kind of trying to set up this channel and get everything going. So we're coming into this relatively green, and that's what we wanted. We wanted kind of more of our
Fresh
actual fresh take on it. So I guess with that being said, man, we'll get back to this history lesson from what Tucker says. We got a half an hour of it, so
Oh boy.
I just figured. So I don't know that it was off the cut, but Tucker was saying that it was a half an hour of a history lesson. So we'll pause it again if you hear anything that strikes you, or we want another talking points. But I was just trying to gather what he was saying in that beginning part, 1300 to 1600. There was border disputes with countries that were affiliated, and like I said, I kind of correlated it to Texas myself, or Florida, if you will. One of our southern states would just all of a sudden turn around and say, yeah, we're gonna be our own entity now.
Yeah, we don't like your deal. We're gonna try something else.
Yeah, and it's what it feels like he's saying that they did. So truth or not, I don't know. But that's how I took what he said. So, all right, I'm gonna hit
Pretty much
play.
what I got.
I have to go check on my dog, so I'm gonna blur out my camera for just a second. I'm gonna go deal with that, but I'll hit play on this and I'll be right back.
All right.
Into Russian, you can translate it into English later. Russia would not agree to admit them straight away, assuming that the war with Poland would start. Nevertheless, in 1654, the pan-Russian assembly of top clergy and landowners, headed by the Tsar, which was the representative body of the power of the old Russian state, decided to include a part of the old Russian lands into Moscow Kingdom. As expected, the war with Poland began. It lasted 13 years, and then in 1654, a truce was concluded. And 32 years later, I think, a peace treaty with Poland, which they called Eternal Peace, was signed. In these lands, the whole left bank of Dnieper, including Kiev, went to Russia, and the whole right bank of Dnieper remained in Poland. Under the rule of Catherine the Great, Russia reclaimed all of its historical lands, including in the south and west. This all lasted until the revolution. Before World War I, Austrian General Staff relied on the ideas of Ukrainianization and started actively promoting the ideas of Ukraine and the Ukrainianization. Their motive was obvious. Just before World War I, they wanted to weaken the potential enemy and secure themselves favorable conditions in the border area. So the idea which had emerged in Poland that people residing in that territory were allegedly not really Russians, but rather belonged to a special ethnic group, Ukrainians, started being propagated by the Austrian General Staff. As far back as the 19th century, theorists calling for Ukrainian independence appeared. All those, however, claimed that Ukraine should have a very good relationship with Russia. They insisted on that. After the 1917 revolution, the Bolsheviks sought to restore the statehood, and the civil war began, including the hostilities with Poland. In 1921, peace with Poland was proclaimed, and under that treaty, the right bank of Dnieper River once again was given back to Poland. In 1939, after Poland cooperated with Hitler, it did collaborate with Hitler, you know? Hitler offered Poland peace and a treaty of friendship, an alliance demanding in return that Poland give back to Germany the so-called Danzig corridor, which connected the bulk of Germany with East Prussia and Königsberg. After World War I, this territory was transferred to Poland, and instead of Danzig, a city of Dansk emerged. Hitler asked them to give it amicably, but they refused.
Of course.
Still, they collaborated with Hitler and engaged together in the partitioning of Czechoslovakia.
May I ask you, you're making the case that Ukraine, certainly parts of Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, is in effect Russia has been for hundreds of years. Why wouldn't you just take it when you became president 24 years ago? You have nuclear weapons, they don't. If it's actually your land, why did you wait so long?
I'll tell you. I'm coming to that. This briefing is coming to an end. It might be boring, but it explains many
You
things.
just don't know how it's relevant.
Good. Good. I'm so gratified that you appreciate that. Thank you. So, before World War II, Poland collaborated with Hitler, and although it did not yield to Hitler's demands, it still participated in the partitioning of Czechoslovakia together with Hitler, as the Poles had not given the Danzig corridor to Germany and went too far, pushing Hitler to start World War II by attacking them. Why was it Poland against whom the war started on 1st September 1939? Poland turned out to be uncompromising, and Hitler had nothing to do but start implementing his plans with Poland. By the way, the USSR, I have read some archived documents, behaved very honestly. It asked Poland's permission to transit its troops through the Polish territory to help Czechoslovakia. But the then Polish foreign minister said that if the Soviet planes flew over Poland, they would be downed over the territory of Poland. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that the war began, and Poland fell prey to the policies it had pursued against Czechoslovakia, as under the well-known Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Part of the territory, including western Ukraine, was to be given to Russia. Thus, Russia, which was then named the USSR, regained its historical lands. After the victory in the Great Patriotic War, as we call World War II, all those territories were ultimately enshrined as belonging to Russia, to the USSR. As for Poland, it received, apparently in compensation, the lands which had originally been German. The eastern parts of Germany, these are now western lands of Poland. Of course, Poland regained access to the Baltic Sea and Danzig, which was once again given its Polish name. So this was how this situation developed. In 1922, when the USSR was being established, the Bolsheviks started building the USSR and established the Soviet Ukraine, which had never existed before.
Right.
Stalin insisted that those republics be included in the USSR as autonomous entities. For some inexplicable reason, Lenin, the founder of the Soviet state, insisted that they be entitled to withdraw from the USSR. And again, for some unknown reasons, he transferred to that newly established Soviet Republic of Ukraine some of the lands together with people living there, even though those lands had never been called Ukraine. And yet, they were made part of that Soviet Republic of Ukraine. Those lands included the Black Sea region, which was received under Catherine the Great, and which had no historical connection with Ukraine whatsoever. Even if we go as far back as 1654, when these lands returned to Russian Empire, that territory was the size of 3 to 4 regions of modern Ukraine, with no Black Sea region. That was completely out of the question.
In 1654.
Exactly.
You obviously have encyclopedic knowledge of this region, but why didn't you make this case for the first 22 years as president that Ukraine wasn't a real country?
The Soviet Union was given a great deal of territory that had never belonged to it, including the Black Sea region. At some point, when Russia received them as an outcome of the Russo-Turkish Wars, they were called New Russia or Novorossiya. But that does not matter. What matters is that Lenin, the founder of the Soviet state, established Ukraine that way. For decades, the Ukrainian Soviet Republic developed as part of the USSR. And for unknown reasons, again, the Bolsheviks were engaged in Ukrainianization. It was not merely because the Soviet leadership was composed to a great extent of those originating from Ukraine. Rather, it was explained by the general policy of indigenization pursued by the Soviet Union. Same things were done in other Soviet republics. This involved promoting national languages and national cultures, which is not bad in principle. That is how the Soviet Ukraine was created. After the World War II, Ukraine received, in addition to the lands that had belonged to Poland before the war, part of the lands that had previously belonged to Hungary and Romania. So Romania and Hungary had some of their lands taken away
All right, I'm pause it right there real quick because he said something that was important to know. After World War II, Ukraine was given land that belonged to Poland. What I will say, when wars happen, assets get divided. So almost that entire history lesson to me is null and void because a world war happened, people lost, and some people were given certain things. So I get it that Catherine the Great from the 1600s, and they didn't have access to the Black Sea, but when they sided with the Germans and went against, I'm not going to say the good guys, but the United States side, and they lost, that's a result of losing a war.
Yeah, consequences for actions.
Yeah, so now there's still more history is going to teach us here, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But to me, that first, I don't know how far we are into this video, 20 minutes or so.
About that.
It almost doesn't matter because a world war happened, you lost, not Putin, but USSR lost, and thusly some of that land got divided up. So I don't know exactly how you feel, but that's kind of what I just grasped from there and looking at it from a different perspective. To me, it's
no, I'm kind of taking it the same way. It's like, well, how are you going to cry about how things were divided because the politicians of the day made those decisions? Russian politicians made those decisions and signed off on them. So to try to cry about it 800 years later, 700 years later, kind of shoots him in the foot, in my opinion.
I mean, like I said, his whole history lesson is great, but they lost World War II, and that seems to be when Ukraine was given this extra land that's disputed that they're going after right now.
Right.
And so with that being said, like, that came from his mouth, not mine.
No, I say you got him there. I say, and something else I'm noticing is that even in Putin's own story here, there's the constant of, okay, Ukraine may be Russian people. I don't know the genetics. I don't know the DNA, whatever. But Putin's trying to say they're just Russians living in this Ukrainian state. There's no ethnic difference. And that may be true, but they're obviously have been fairly consistent about wanting to break away.
Yeah. So, like I said, I wanted to hit that right there because I don't know exactly what I don't know what he's going to say from World War II and on and all this other Ukrainian stuff, but just the way that I view it from World War II and on, he said it, not me. Ukraine was awarded those lands, and that's a result of war. That's how. That's
spoils of war.
That's exactly it. So, whether it's right or wrong, I didn't sign those papers, and it is what it is. I can see they
really trying to second guess the politicians of the time who made these deals.
Right. So, all right. Well, we will hit play and continue on.
And given to the Soviet Ukraine, and they still remain part of Ukraine. So in this sense, we have every reason to affirm that Ukraine is an artificial state that was shaped at Stalin's will.
Do you believe Hungary has a right to take its land back from Ukraine, and that other nations have a right to go back to their 1654 borders?
I'm not sure whether they should go back to the 1654 borders. But given Stalin's time, so-called Stalin's regime, which as many claim saw numerous violations of human rights and violations of the rights of other states, one may say that they could claim back those lands of theirs while having no right to do that. It is at least understandable.
Have you told Viktor Orban that he can have part of Ukraine?
Never. I have never told him, not a single time. We have not even had any conversation on that, but I actually know for sure that Hungarians who live there wanted to get back to their historical land. Moreover, I would like to share a very interesting story with you.
Oh boy.
I digress, it's a personal one. Somewhere in the early 80s, I went on a road trip in a car from then Leningrad across the Soviet Union through Kiev, made a stop in Kiev, and then went to western Ukraine. I went to the town of Beregovoye, and all the names of towns and villages there were in Russian and in a language I did not understand, in Hungarian, in Russian and in Hungarian. Not in Ukrainian, in Russian and in Hungarian. I was driving through some kind of village, and there were men sitting next to the houses, and they were wearing black three-piece suits and black cylinder hats. I asked, are they some kind of entertainers? I was told, no, they were not entertainers, they're Hungarians. I said, what are they doing here? What do you mean? This is their land, they live here. This was during the Soviet time in the 1980s. They preserved the Hungarian language, Hungarian names, and all their national costumes. They are Hungarians and they feel themselves to be Hungarians. And of course, when now there is an infringement.
Well, that is, and there's a lot of that, though. I think many nations are upset about Transylvania as well, as you obviously know. But many nations feel frustrated by the redrawn borders of the wars of the 20th century and wars going back 1,000 years, the ones that you mentioned. But the fact is that you didn't make this case in public until 2 years ago, February. And in the case that you made, which I read today, you explain at great length that you felt a physical threat from the West in NATO, including potentially a nuclear threat. And that's what got you to move. Is that a fair characterization of what you said?
I understand that my long speeches probably fall outside of the genre of the interview. That is why I asked you at the beginning, are we going to have a serious talk or a show? You said a serious talk. So bear with me, please. We're coming to the point where the Soviet Ukraine was established. Then, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. And everything that Russia had generously bestowed on Ukraine was dragged away by the latter. I'm coming to a very important point of today's agenda.
Thank you.
After all, the collapse of the Soviet Union was effectively initiated by the Russian leadership. I do not understand what the Russian leadership was guided by at the time, but I suspect there were several reasons to think everything would be fine. First, I think that then Russian leadership believed that the fundamentals of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine were, in fact, a common language. More than 90% of the population there spoke Russian. Family ties. Every third person there had some kind of family or friendship ties. Common culture, common history. Finally, common faith, coexistence with a single state for centuries, and deeply interconnected economies. All of these were so fundamental. All these elements together make our good relationships inevitable. The second point is a very important one. I want you, as an American citizen, and your viewers to hear about this as well. The former Russian leadership assumed that the Soviet Union had ceased to exist, and therefore there were no longer any ideological dividing lines. Russia even agreed voluntarily and proactively to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and believed that this would be understood by the so-called civilized West as an invitation for cooperation and association. That is what Russia was expecting, both from the United States and the so-called collective West as a whole. There were smart people, including in Germany, Egon Bahr, a major politician of the Social Democratic Party, who insisted in his personal conversations with the Soviet leadership on the brink of the collapse of the Soviet Union that a new security system should be established in Europe. Help should be given to unify Germany, but a new system should be also established to include the United States, Canada, Russia, and other Central European countries.
Yes.
But NATO needs not to expand. That's what he said. If NATO expands, everything would be just the same as during the Cold War, only closer to Russia's borders. That's all. He was a wise old man, but no one listened to him. In fact, he got angry once. If, he said, you don't listen to me, I'm never setting my foot in Moscow once again. Everything happened just as he had said.
Well, of course, it did come true, and you've mentioned this many times. I think it's a fair point, and many in America thought that relations between Russia and the United States would be fine with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, that the opposite happened. But you've never explained why you think that happened, except to say that the West fears a strong Russia. But We have a strong China the West does not seem very afraid of. What about Russia, do you think, convinced policymakers they had to take it down?
Yeah, I found that interesting too. So, what it sounded like Putin said there was the Russian leadership or the Soviet Union collapsed their economy in hopes intentionally to garner better support from the West. And there was a lot of interesting stipulations that it sounded like he just said that had to take place, and no one could move. And I understand not wanting to move NATO in close to your country,
Right.
You know, technically enemies, but if you are saying that you want to be our partners and our friends, why would you care? So
yeah. Well, I granted my view of history is tainted by, you know, my education, my status as a U.S. citizen, but in my mind, I got to call bullshit on him for the intentional collapse of their economy. That is not, you know, I remember my father's conversations from that time, and it's just, I don't see why any nation would intentionally collapse their own economy like that. I say they were overspending on the war budgets. They were overspending on everything. There was rampant corruption. I don't believe him that it was an intentional collapse.
Yeah, I feel like that from what he said, and I'm only going off his words, it feels very you scratch our backs and we'll crash our economy.
Yeah.
Also, I was thinking about it while this was playing. This overlay that I have is no means a threat to anybody. This is just to alter the video. So this is whoever's watching. This is.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, this is not a threat to anybody. We are not threatening. We just making the video our own, and that was.
I mean, if it was a threat, well, obviously I'm a serious target here, so
it's right on you. No, this is just a this is just an overlay. This is by no means a threat to anybody. We're just like I said, we're listening to what they're having to say, and I don't have any particular feelings, bad or good, towards Russia. I have no. But I'm just going off of what he's saying and making my judgment off of that. Tucker does it. Usually he does a pretty good job from a lot of the interviews I've seen of getting info. So I think we're almost done with our history lesson here, it seems like. So it looks like Putin's going to tell us a little bit more. You're trying to look through the.
Yeah, I was just trying to catch a timestamp on the video.
Oh, I think we're at 27, 20. Yeah, I think we're getting close to the end of the history lesson. But like I said, this overlay is not a threat. This is just a clear overlay to alter the video so that we can play
make YouTube happy.
Yeah. We've also sped up the video as well. But yeah, not a threat. We're not coming after. We do not condone violence, as you can see from our banner down here. Conflict by peace. So. But yeah, it's just like I said, I just found that interesting what he said. It sounded like we'll collapse our economy if you don't move in close. But if we're gonna be friends, why would it matter if I was your neighbor? So that's what I find interesting.
About that. I say that's another ball of worms altogether. But
so, all right, well, we're get back into this. Getting more Putin talk and see where we're going.
The West is afraid of strong China more than it fears a strong Russia, because Russia has 150 million people and China has 1.5 billion population, and its economy is growing by leaps and bounds, or 5% a year. It used to be even more. But that's enough for China. As Bismarck once put it, potentials are the most important. China's potential is enormous. It is the biggest economy in the world today in terms of purchasing power parity and the size of the economy. It has already overtaken the United States quite a long time ago, and it is growing at a rapid clip. Let's not talk about who is afraid of whom. Let's not reason in such terms. And let's get into the fact that after 1991, when Russia expected that it would be welcomed into the brotherly family of civilized nations, nothing like this happened. You tricked us. I don't mean you personally when I say you. Of course, I'm talking about the United States. The promise was that NATO would not expand eastward, but it happened 5 times. There were 5 waves of expansion. We tolerated all that. We were trying to persuade them. We were saying, please don't. We are as bourgeois now as you are. We are a market economy and there is no communist party power. Let's negotiate. Moreover, I have also said this publicly before. There was a moment when a certain rift started growing between us. Before that, Yeltsin came to the United States. Remember, he spoke in Congress and said the good words. God bless America. Everything he said were signals. Let us in. Remember the developments in Yugoslavia before the Yeltsin was lavished with praise? As soon as the developments in Yugoslavia started, he raised his voice in support of Serbs, and we couldn't but raise our voices for Serbs in their defense. I understand that there were complex processes underway there, I do, but Russia could not help raising its voice in support of Serbs, because Serbs are also a special and close to us nation, with Orthodox culture and so on. It's a nation that has suffered so much for generations. Well, regardless, what is important is that Yeltsin expressed his support. What did the United States do? In violation of international law and the UN Charter, it started bombing Belgrade. It was the United States that let the genie out of the bottle. Moreover, when Russia protested and expressed its resentment, what was said? The UN Charter and international law have become obsolete. Now everyone invokes international law, but at that time they started saying that everything was outdated. Everything had to be changed. Indeed, some things need to be changed, as the balance of power has changed. It's true, but not in this manner. Yeltsin was immediately dragged through the mud, accused of alcoholism, of understanding nothing, of knowing nothing. He understood everything, I assure you. Well, I became president in 2000. I thought, okay, the Yugoslav issue is over, but we should try to restore relations. Let's reopen the door that Russia had tried to go through. And moreover, I said it publicly, I can reiterate. At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, you know, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, you know, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now. You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview. He'll confirm it. I wouldn't have said anything like that if it hadn't happened. Okay.
Were you sincere?
It's impossible now.
Would you have joined NATO?
Look, I asked the question, is it possible or not? And the answer I got was no. If I was insincere in my desire to find out what the leadership position was...
But if he had said yes, would you have joined NATO?
If he had said yes, the process of rapprochement would have commenced, and eventually it might have happened if we had seen some sincere wish on the other side of our partners. But it didn't happen. Well, no means no. Okay, fine.
Why do you think that is? Just to get to motive. I know you're clearly bitter about it. I understand. But why do you think the West rebuffed you then? Why the hostility? Why did the end of the Cold War not fix the relationship? What motivates this from your point of view?
You said I was bitter about the answer. No, it's not bitterness. It's just a statement of fact. We're not bride and groom, bitterness, resentment. It's not about those kind of matters in such circumstances. We just realized we weren't welcome there, that's all. Okay, fine. But let's build relations in another manner. Let's look for common ground elsewhere. Why we received such a negative response, you should ask your leaders. I can only guess why. Too big a country with its own opinion and so on. And the United States, I've seen how issues are being resolved in NATO. I will give you another example now concerning Ukraine. The US leadership exerts pressure, and all NATO members obediently vote, even if they do not like something. Now, I'll tell you what happened in this regard with Ukraine in 2008, although it's being discussed. I'm not going to open a secret to you, say anything new.
You have something you need to say?
Yeah. Him saying that the United Nations follows whatever the U.S.'s wishes happen to be. Again, I got to call BS on him, because if you look at the voting record of the United Nations, 90% of the stuff that the United States puts forward gets voted against by the body of the United Nations. So,
and we also have a turnover in our country. So he, like, did you catch when he met with Clinton?
I did not.
He said 2000. The outgoing president. 2000.
Yeah, so Clinton really didn't have any power to offer him a seat at the table for NATO.
Yeah, and you know, the United States had changed that year from you know, a Democrat running the country to a Republican. Not saying Bush would have said yes, but there was a change. There was a change that year. Also, every 2 years, our country changed. You know, like it changes.
Mm-hmm.
There's new senators. There's new congressmen every 2 years. So
yeah,
you know, that's the democracy that our country has. So an answer you got in 2000 may not have been in 2002.
Yeah, and while I don't doubt that Putin asked about joining NATO, I have to ask myself, at least, was he legitimately serious about joining NATO? Carlson asked him the same question, basically. Were you serious? Would you have joined? While I can see benefits of the Soviet Union joining into NATO, I just don't see that they ever would. I mean, that
I think ultimately they're always going to keep.
But
I think ultimately they're always going to keep the big three separate. So China, Russia, and the United States will never be on the same team and
right.
team just worldwide. But I found it interesting what he said about building bridges elsewhere. So I'm curious to see where he's going to go with that. But now he's going back. Now he's taking a step back to 2008, I think he said. So we're going into something with Ukraine and a decision that NATO made. And so the United States isn't solely responsible for the decisions that NATO does. So I'm curious to hear where this goes, but yeah, it was just some of those dates that he said, and like he said, outgoing president, and they flashed to Bill Clinton. So in 2000, George H.W. Bush took over. So I don't know. I can see his side of the story, and I can also see where Tucker was saying that being bitter, because I can see why you would be bitter if that was said to you.
Yeah.
You know, and when he took over, he said 2000. Putin took the presidency in 2000. So their country was 9 years from essentially bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just in a straight rebuilding.
For that
may
reason,
have been something.
I mean, for that reason alone, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. God, I don't mean to keep cutting you off.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say, for that reason, I can see the Soviet Union wanting to join NATO for the economic benefits that kind of alliance would bring. It would bring trade. It would bring new tourism, et cetera, just because people, oh, hey, it's safe now.
Right. Yeah, and I think if you can put yourself, if you were in Putin's shoes in 2000 when he took over, that would have been something that would have been, your country is only 9 years from being, completely bankrupt. So that would have been, I would suspect that would have been something that would have been highly sought after. And he let one man say something that was on his way out, make a decision. And then I found it interesting what he was saying about the person that came and spoke to Congress. I don't know enough about that war to really speak on that. So I will do my research on that and get back on a later date.
Yeah, no, I remember seeing that on TV as a child. I'm a little older than Mike is, if nobody caught on to that.
Yeah, we're two different generations. We got a Gen X and a millennial.
You're not millennial, are you?
I think that I am a millennial. I think I'm not gonna completely dox myself, but yeah, I am. I think that I technically am a millennial.
Okay.
I definitely have more of the values of a Gen Xer, but it is what it is. All right. Well, we got about 5 more minutes. We'll play here, and then we'll start wrapping this up for part 1. That went pretty quick. I guess the history lesson. I kind of ate this one up. I think our part 2, when they start going back and forth, you're gonna probably get a lot more sparks out of me and Matt in that one.
No, definitely.
So let's go ahead and get 5 more minutes of play or so. We'll find a stopping point somewhere in here, and we'll start wrapping this one up.
After that, we tried to build relations in different ways. For example, the events in the Middle East, in Iraq. We were building relations with the United States in a very soft, prudent, cautious manner. I repeatedly raised the issue that the United States should not support separatism or terrorism in the North Caucasus. But they continue to do it anyway. And political support, information support, financial support, even military support came from the United States and its satellites for terrorist groups in the Caucasus. I once raised this issue with my colleague, also the President of the United States. He says, "It's impossible. Do you have proof?" I said, "Yes." I was prepared for this conversation, and I gave him that proof. He looked at it, and you know what he said? "I apologize, but that's what happened." I'll quote. He says, "Well, I'm gonna kick their ass." We waited and waited for some response. There was no reply. I said to the FSB director, "Write to the CIA, what is the result of the conversation with President?" He wrote once, twice, and then we got a reply. We have the answer in the archive. The CIA replied, "We have been working with the opposition in Russia. We believe that this is the right thing to do, and we will keep on doing it." Just ridiculous. Well, okay. We realized that it was out of the question.
Forces in opposition to you. So you're saying the CIA is trying to overthrow your government?
Of course, they meant in that particular case the separatists, the terrorists who fought with us in the Caucasus. That's who they called the opposition. This is the second point. The third moment is a very important one. Is the moment when the U.S. missile defense system was created. The beginning. We persuaded for a long time not to do it in the United States. Moreover, after was invited by Bush Jr.'s father, Bush Sr., to visit his place on the ocean, I had a very serious conversation with President Bush and his team. I proposed that the United States, Russia, and Europe jointly create a missile defense system that, we believe, if created unilaterally, threatens our security, despite the fact that the United States officially said that it was being created against missile threats from Iran. That was the justification for the deployment of the missile defense system. I suggested working together, Russia, the United States, and Europe. They said it was very interesting. They asked me, "Are you serious?" I said, "Absolutely."
Let me ask, what year was this?
I don't remember. It is easy to find out on the internet when I was in the USA at the invitation of Bush Sr. It is even easier to learn from someone I'm going to tell you about. I was told it was very interesting. I said, just imagine if we could tackle such a global strategic security challenge together. The world will change. We'll probably have disputes, probably economic and even political ones, but we could drastically change the situation in the world. He says yes, and asks, "Are you serious?" I said, "Of course. We need to think about it," I'm told. I said, "Go ahead, please." Then Secretary of Defense Gates, former Director of CIA, and Secretary of State Rice came in here, in this cabinet, right here at this table. They sat on this table. Me, the foreign minister, the Russian defense minister on that side. They said to me, "Yes, we have thought about it. We agree." I said, "Thank God, great, but with some exceptions."
So twice you've described U.S. presidents making decisions and then being undercut by their agency heads. So it sounds like you're describing a system that's not run by the people who are elected in your telling.
All right, we'll pause it right there. So we made it 38 minutes. Let me remove this. He said some things there also, too. He alluded to he was going to be talking to Obama, and it was about Iran and Syria, that they were supposedly working together to free from terrorists. So that was interesting. And then when he brought up, he did some fancy wordplay there, where he said Bush Senior or Bush Jr.'s dad. So if Putin took power in 2000, George W. or HW was not the president. So he used some fancy wordplay there to trick people potentially watching this interview. He was invited to hang out with George Bush, the president. HW, the first Bush president, was not the president, and that is who he met with.
Right. Well, and I think it's also kind of a jab at Bush Sr. because to my understanding, I may be wrong, completely off on this, but to my understanding, Putin and Bush Sr., and for that matter, Bush Jr., did not get along at all. I said,
well, he also took some. He took some stabs there at the CIA as well, operating in Syria and Iran. Well, Bush Sr., prior to running politics, was part of the CIA.
CIA chief.
I believe, if I remember correctly, he was the director. So, and it's just interesting.
Well,
the wordplay there, it could trick you up if you were just listening and you were hearing what he's saying, because the stuff he's saying is like, oh, the president, but then you have to do the timelines.
Right.
So
I say, and Putin also completely glazes over the fact that the Soviet Union was directly interfering with several of the Middle Eastern states, trying to get them to overthrow their governments. Okay, yes, our CIA may have been messing with Russian assets in the region, et cetera, but that was kind of direct interplay between, basically spy games back and forth.
Yep. So it's just, like I said, it's interesting. I can see how he's, I'm not going to say manipulating. He's telling his side of the story, but it's confusing to people if you don't pay attention to the dates that things are happening.
Yeah, and he's being very cloudy about some of these dates, I notice.
Yeah, so he didn't directly say Obama, because I don't know why he didn't say that. And then when he was referring to Clinton was either out or on his way out when they met.
Mm-hmm.
And then he talked about meeting with HW. So there, like I said, there's just a lot of the dates and things aren't quite adding up. So I think the interview, now that it seems like we're over the history lesson. I think things are about it. I think things will get a little bit more spicy in this interview. I'm looking forward to recording part 2, probably tomorrow.
Oh, definitely.
But I probably record part 2, and I would assume part 3, because we only made it 30 something minutes into that. 38 minutes. 38 minutes. Well, we kind of knew that, and we were able to get through probably a little bit more on this one than we will on the next ones, because we're for those that are watching, thank you very much for watching. Hit that subscribe button. We are going to give our own perspective on this, whether you like it or you dislike it, how we view things. That's just
everything is opinion. I say everybody knows the famous saying about opinions. Everybody's got one.
It's like everyone's got one. So, well, I guess with that being said, man, we will send this one out, and we will be back. We'll be recording tomorrow. So look forward to part 2, and probably going to be part 3.
And 4.
There might be a 4. There might be a 4, but for sure there's going to be a part 2 and a 3. And we're going to be doing these more frequently, not just with this. So we appreciate you watching. Hit that subscribe button and share us out if you enjoyed our content. And we will see you in the next one.
Appreciate it, everybody. Thanks.